Hello, hello, everybody. We'll be starting the panel now. Could we get just one more thumbs up if you can hear us all right out there? Amazing. Thank you all so much. Oh my goodness. Well, hello, good evening. My name is Sam Long. I'm Community Outreach Manager for Autism Tennessee, and your moderator for this evening's panel. Thank you all for coming out to this evening to our Spectrum Chats panel, graciously funded by the Humanities Tennessee grant. Their support helped us to ensure that these education events through this year are available at no charge to our community. So thank you to Humanities Tennessee for your commitment and support. We appreciate y'all. The purpose of these panels is to create an affirming space for autistic people to share their lived and living experience. We believe bridging the gap between autistic folks and the wider community helps create new worlds where neurodivergent folks and their families, loved ones, and support circles can thrive. Before we dive in this evening, we want to remind you that this is a body-mind friendly space, so feel free to stim, stand up, fidget, doodle, move your body, step away, or any other movement that works for you. For the folks that are in person location, we also do have a variety of sensory tools for you to use. So please feel free to get up and grab those throughout the panel as you feel comfortable. We appreciate you spending your Wednesday with us as our panelists dive into the expansive and abundant topic of the intersection of LGBTQIA2S plus identities and neurodivergence. Queer and autistic identities often overlap, but this intersection is still frequently left out of mainstream conversations about autism. Research shows autistic folks are more likely to identify as LGBTQIA+, and many queer communities include a large number of autistic people. For many autistic people, exploring gender identity and sexuality is part of learning who they are in a neuronormative world that often pushes people to think, feel, and be a certain way. Panelists will explore what it's like to be both autistic and queer and the ongoing work to create inclusive, affirming, and truly welcoming spaces. We'll now introduce our panelists and then move into our discussion. We'll save about 20 minutes or so towards the end for questions from the audience in person and through our lovely folks in Zoom. So if you think of something that wasn't included in our list of questions tonight, please feel free to address our panelists at that time. So with that, we'll begin by introducing our first panelist. So it'll be the first person to my right and to y'all's right in Zoom land. This is our first guest, Arden. Arden is a 32-year-old autistic self-advocate, passionate about disability justice and autism advocacy. They are a librarian with 10 years of experience interacting with the public and providing programs for teens. They received their autism diagnosis at age 28 and went through the interactive ADA accommodation process at work after medical leave due to autistic burnout at age 30. They love reading fan fiction, crocheting, and playing video games in their free time. Welcome, Arden. Next, we have Alan, pronouns he, him. Alan is a queer, autistic, and trans Mexican-American writer, advocate, and community organizer navigating the intersections of neurodivergence, disability, and diaspora. As a brown, chronically ill trans man, his perspective is rooted in the messy, joyful, and often invisible labor of building access and affirmation for multiply marginalized communities. He's passionate about data science and healthcare, herpetology, and disability justice in LGBTQ plus settings. When offline, he's likely muttering about salamander facts or the tyranny of PDFs that refuse to be screen reader friendly. Welcome, Alan. Wonderful. Moving on to our next panelist, Tara, pronouns she, her. Tara currently works in higher ed, previously doing social work with unhoused folks, wearing many hats despite having a heavily STEM background. Her main special interest is music and is constantly looking for music that is unlike other things she's heard, especially by queer artists. She lives with one of her partners and her pup, Chrissy. She has both obtained ACA accommodations for herself in several positions and assisted others with the process as a coworker and supervisor. Welcome, Tara. All right, and last of our in-person panelists, we have Kimiko Farrell. Hello, pronouns they, them. Kimiko is a multidisciplinary artist with an intimate focus on dynamic queer storytelling and disability advocacy. Welcome. And with us, we also have a remote panelist today, Eva Part, who is joining us in Zoom land. Hi, Eva. Thanks for being
Ooh,
here.
thank you. I'm happy to be here. Would you like me to say a little bit about myself since I might have forgot to send in that bio?
Oh, yes, please. We will turn up the volume so our lovely folks in at this location can hear you. So, all right, go ahead.
Okay, cool. My name is Eva. I use she, her, or she, they pronouns. I have been diagnosed with autism for 4 years now. I have autism and ADHD. I'm chronically ill, multiple disabilities, and that kind of shapes like my passions recently. So I'm in the middle of making my second all make producing my second all disabled drag and burlesque production. It will be in July for Disability History Month. So I'm excited about that. No, Disability Pride Month, sorry. But yeah, that's a little bit about me. And thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Eva. All right. Wonderful, wonderful. And with that, we'll launch in with our questions. Our first round of questions for the panelists. Again, if you are in Zoom land or joining us in person and have questions for the panelists, we'll save about 20 minutes towards the end where you can chime in and ask the panelists what you need. All right. So to begin, anyone's welcome to either answer this or not if you don't feel comfortable. We'll move between letting Eva go first on Zoom and the in-person panelists go first. So for the in-person panelists, this question, how did you first start to understand and embrace your identity as both queer and autistic? And if you'd like to chime in first, just it's a big question. Okay.
Hi, can y'all hear me okay? Cool. Um, so I guess I don't necessarily have the happiest story about that. As far as queer, in 2013, I kind of realized it, didn't touch it again for 7 years. Um, you know, didn't think about it. And 2020-ish, I basically just had too many trans femme friends to ignore it anymore. Um, so kind of, yeah, just dove into that because I was already basically in the community and they were just waiting for me to tell them that I was trans. So, because everybody else always knows. Um, and then autism was, as a child, I was purposely not tested, like, autism stigma stuff. So, yeah, that's whatever. But I also had a partner for a really long time who was very um, made fun of me a lot for things that I did that were very clearly based in like neurodivergence and autistic stuff. And so for a really long time, that also kind of kept me from addressing or embracing that or thinking about it too much. But since I'm no longer with that person, it's been a much more, I've been with people who are much more open to that kind of thing, just like to me being who I am. Uh, and many of them are also autistic. So yeah, um, not necessarily the happiest, but that's kind of cliff notes of where I came to here. You want it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Kimiko. So I got diagnosed with ADHD first, and pretty quickly after my ADHD diagnosis, I kind of started dealing with a lot of chronic illness, and it kind of forced me to unmask. I didn't really, wasn't a willing decision. It was something that kind of happened as a result of dealing with a lot of physical disabilities. And in the process of that, I think everything that was behind that mask kind of quickly came to fruition. I had known that I was queer since I was in high school, but I had a hard time accepting that for a while, and I figured out stuff about like my gender journey like quickly after my ADHD diagnosis because again, it just kind of came out of nowhere, it felt like. Um, and because of my health issues, it's been hard to kind of work through that journey, but I think I very much like vibe with the fact that my like autism and transness kind of go hand in hand, and they very much like describe my experience and like describe like my experience with the world as like a queer person. And I received my autism diagnosis through like a Vanderbilt study, because diagnoses are really expensive. And I did not have access to one. But for a while there, I was a really high masking person and I was very, very, very unhappy. And now that I know those things about myself, I feel like even though the unmasking process is hard, it's been a much happier experience living.
Um, I'm Alan again. I realized that I was queer like significantly earlier, like maybe middle school or high school, but it took me significantly longer to like realize that I was autistic because I really didn't understand what it was for a while. I think I got it confused with some other um developmental things, and I didn't really understand what it was. A lot of my like quirks and things that I did differently that people would point out, they would make it like more about like personality traits that I was being ditzy or uh made things really pedantic and overly complicated for no reason. My family also has like a strong anti-intellectual conspiracy theory streak. So if I ever tried to make things too complicated in their eyes, they would just be like, "You need to dumb it down. There's no reason to be really explaining things like that." But that's always how I've been. I think about things a lot. I try to figure things out. That's how I ended up realizing I was autistic because I was struggling with all these different things and I didn't understand why. And every time I was trying to figure it out, it would just lead me towards you're probably autistic. I took a bunch of tests. I ended up talking to my therapist, and when we went to my therapist, it was extremely obvious. So, but that was it was weird because I was always treated like I was autistic, but like no one would tell me that. They would just treat me differently or not approach me for whatever XYZ reason or like not like me. And I didn't really understand that. So since I was needing to figure that out, that's how I ended up there. And the queerness aspect, it did like I figured out I was queer significantly earlier, but that was more about like sexual identity and stuff. I didn't figure out the gender stuff until significantly later, and it was pretty much at the same time as the realizing I was autistic and figuring that out. That was all like within the same couple of years, it seemed like. So I also agree that it seems like my experience as being trans also is very similar to my experience of operating in the world as an autistic person. Okay. Okay, here you go. Thank you.
Um, yeah, I also realized I was queer at a young age, just in adolescence. And I had this idea that the reason I felt so weird and different and um, all of that stuff was because I was queer, and that once I got to college and I would be able to be out and I would meet my community and everything would be better. And then I got to college and it was not like that. Um, and then after college, I discovered that I was autistic, and that kind of made a lot more sense and helped me come to terms with like why I felt different and weird. And I was able to find a queer community within the autism community. So I am really thankful for that. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And Eva, if you'd like to share, we'll turn the volume up for you again.
So I'm also diagnosed with OCD, and that showed up a lot during both of these identity discoveries. When it comes to being queer, it started when I had feelings for a girl I couldn't ignore. I started kind of recognizing feelings for girls in high school. I had them in middle school, but I started recognizing it, but I would very much so like repress it and push it down. Thinking back to my autism diagnosis, I did very similar, no, missed a line. I did lots of research into different sexualities and how to know you're queer. Thinking back to my autism diagnosis, it was a very similar experience. Um, I became comfortable identifying as somewhere in the LGBT spectrum. At first, I identified as bisexual. After I had some experience with women in college, and then I dated a man, and about into like a year into that, that just did not feel right for me. So I began questioning, like, was the relationship not right, or am I not attracted to men? Um, some self exploration later, I've discovered I'm not attracted to men. And then a little bit more about my autism diagnosis. I first became informed on autism. Well, I was informed on autism my whole life. I thought I was. In high school, I was a support worker to someone who was autistic, so I thought I knew what it was. But actually, like TikTok and the internet kind of opened up my mind a lot more to like the different levels and how they can present and all that stuff. I was tested once by my therapist, a second time by like a non-biased psych source. Um, and after I got ADHD and an autism diagnosis from both sources. I kind of went into like a year of self-doubt. I would really obsessively research about autism and ask for a lot of reassurance, and my OCD really played out until I was officially diagnosed with OCD the next year. And then I began to identify why I had so much doubt, and I started to accept my autism diagnosis about a year after I got that OCD diagnosis. And it's been 3 years since I've been diagnosed with OCD, and I can genuinely say that I am at peace with being autistic.
Great. Thank you, Eva. I I love what everybody's saying about like maybe some other portions of their identity um kind of leading the way into this autism diagnosis. And I love what you were saying, Alan, about your trans identity and autistic identity being inextricably linked. Um, which makes me very excited to pose this next question to you all. So for many people, this intersective identity between LGBTQ plus identities and autistic identities are inextricably linked. You may have heard the terms neuroqueer or autigender that help provide language for this experience. If you identify with that experience or those words, how would you describe your experience with that identity and what makes them inseparable for you? And again, you're welcome to answer or not, whatever you're comfortable with.
Did you want to start with me? Was that correct?
Yes, let's do that,
Okay.
Eva.
Okay, sounds good. So I don't know if I identify as a cis woman, so I wouldn't identify with the audy gender, but I am curious about looking more into if neuroqueer feels like a good explanation for me. I think being autistic made it more difficult to realize that I was a lesbian because of my lack of interoception, as well as I struggle with alexithymia. And it took me several years to fully accept that I was most comfortable identifying as a lesbian just because I was like, well, I don't know. I don't want to put myself in a community that wasn't my community, which is exactly what I sounded like when I was questioning if I had autism or not. So they kind of run parallel and then when I did get diagnosed with autism, something that was really similar and has maintained being similar for me is having to constantly come out. I'm more femme presenting, so unfortunately, I still get read as straight a lot. And when I first meet people, I do mask a bit. I'm much less masking than I used to be, but it can come out as kind of like a nervous protection thing. And so both of those things kind of, I don't know, shape how I'm perceived. Therefore, they shape my experience with my identity.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eva. Great. And then would anybody else like to take on the question in person? Ellen?
Um, I was wanting to talk about the autigender aspect. I don't like explicitly use that term all the time, but when I do read about it, I do relate to it a lot. For me, it was very noticeable and like pronounced in my transition, especially the social transition, because while I was transitioning, I realized how much like I wasn't ever particularly good at masking, but so much of my masking was also tied around to operating in society as a woman. So transitioning and trying to get out of that. I realized that when I was not trying to do that anymore, I felt very vulnerable and like out in the open, like everyone could see me more. And it really heightened my anxiety because I got rid of, or I was trying to distance myself from the like masking or just masking tied with gender that I was trying to transition away from. So that was always like very interesting to me. I would think about the intersection between how we operate in society versus our gender presentation versus performing our gender versus like how we perceive ourselves versus perceiving society in our relationship to our gender. Like going over that all the time, thinking about it obsessively just because like I think about things a lot. But uh and it just made it sense to me that so much of my gender identity was related to that because I mean, maybe if I didn't feel forced to mask from the get-go, maybe it would have been way more obvious to me earlier that I was trans because I didn't start transitioning until I was in my late 20s. So that's kind of a while. So yeah, yeah. So I like the audio gender thing. Um, okay. Did you want to do there's someone else? Here you go.
I just wanted to like relate to the experience that you were just talking about. I was very entrenched in like performative femininity for a very, very long time. I still think I am. And I think that it was a reflex that I think came along with trying to fit into like girlhood and fit into society as a teenager specifically, just because I think I was very desperate to just fit in at all. And I think that definitely correlates with being autistic as well, just because I think that I didn't feel like I fit in for a variety of reasons, but I didn't know why. And it turns out there were a lot of them. Um, and I think that I relate to like the concept of like Audi gender, um, and specifically because like my experience is like realizing that I'm neurodivergent and then the gender stuff happening. Just because that's kind of how things have happened for me. And I find that the more like queer people I talk to and the more trans people I talk to that also identify with like the neurodivergent experience, they also relate to gender performative measures like within society being a part of their mask and being a part of how they feel like they need to show up in front of other people. Um, and I still think that that's something that I'm personally trying to unpack. Um, but it's still something that is difficult to understand. I'm ready to give the mic.
Arden doesn't want it, I'll take it.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, Hi, so kind of similar to what Alan said. Um, I don't really identify with the term like autigender, but like when I read people talking about it or discussing their experiences, they're often fairly in line with mine. Um, but I also generally don't put terms on most of my like life experiences, so it's kind of just in keeping with that trend. There are some things that like kind of can't not acknowledge, or I mean, I guess I didn't acknowledge some of them for a very long time, so that's not entirely true either. But yeah, so it's I just kind of vibe with it. I don't know if that's very helpful for anyone, but like it, I relate to folks who do embrace terms like that. So that's, yeah, I don't really do terms very much. So
Thanks so much for that, Tara. You brought up an important point, where, sometimes the terms aren't helpful. You know what? Not everybody identifies with the language that we're given. Language can be very, um, empowering in that way, and sometimes they can be limiting. It kind of just depends on the person and their experiences. So thank you for sharing that side of it, where maybe you don't identify with specific labels. That's great. Moving on to the next question, we'll start with the in-person folks. Um, I didn't mention it before we got started, but happy Pride to everybody celebrating. A lot of Pride events. We'll talk about accessibility with this question. So, a lot of Pride events are often inaccessible in a variety of ways and don't acknowledge the intersection of needs across neurotypes or abilities. For example, many Pride events are held at bars, which are often loud and overstimulating without offering a sensory-friendly space. Intoxicants are encouraged, which aren't accessible to sober, curious people, or those in recovery. And especially in the South, where smoking in venues is more permitted, they can be filled with smoke. It can trigger asthma attacks and other sensitivities. Um, with those considerations, what would an ideal accommodating Pride event look for you in otherwise affirming space? What would that look like to you?
So I think uh I like the idea of outdoor pride events, but mostly just the idea of it. Just because it's something that can be really difficult to navigate when you have a lot of like chronic illnesses and like physical disabilities, but also like sensory issues, and also especially when it's in the summertime, like June is Pride Month, and June is an especially hot month, so it can be really difficult, not just for like disabled people, but like any queer person to go to. So I think having more inclusive indoor spaces would be really helpful, accessible not just for people who have like sensory issues with like weather, or also just like chronic illnesses that deal with like weather issues, but also for people who have physical disabilities who need access to like accessible bathrooms or things like that. I think can be really helpful. Um, and like recently, I went to the Autism Tennessee's like Pride event, and I think that was probably one of the most like accessible events that I'd been to, just because it was indoors, and there were more like quiet activities that we could do, and we could like participate in socializing, but also like decide not to if we didn't want to. Um, and usually when I think of Pride events, I definitely don't think of those things. So it was nice to see that for once at least. But yeah.
Uh, so there's actually a really good venue that I was planning on going to for Pride that is going to be indoors and is like prioritizing activities and stuff. So I definitely would like to see more of that kind of stuff. Um, it being in the hottest month, I have so many autonomic issues. I cannot handle being in the sun like that. I will kill over. So, um, and I would like to see like more fall or winter events, because like especially here, like winter is not that cold. Like having something outside would be kind of fun. Um, because I really like outdoor activities. Just summer is increasingly not the time to do outdoor activities. So I like things that are indoors, things I can go to, because I definitely want to socialize and meet more people. Plus, like regular Pride isn't really good for that. It's usually just corporations trying to get me to buy stuff, which is not the Pride vibe I'm wanting. I want to meet other community and communicate with them and like see what they're doing and support their businesses, like the small businesses, like a queer person with an art shop, not like Uber. I'm tired of Uber. Like, so uh, so yeah, I would like to see more stuff like that. Someone else.
I'll go unless. Okay. So yeah, I think kind of the idea, I resonate with the idea of outdoor pride events and just not really wanting to do anything with them myself, to have to do anything with them. Just sensory wise, like that much movement and like sounds that I don't expect, and here it's summer, so it's probably very bright out, is not my idea of a good time. I don't know what my ideal like pride themed event would be. I would probably just want to spend time with my queer friends, like maybe like a body doubling party where like this a bunch of us get together and it's just do whatever you want, it makes you happy. Because that's always good. But as far as like organized themed events, I really am not totally sure. Um, it just, yeah, I'm not sure, but I do like the idea. But outside is big, so.
Like one more that you said. Sorry. I was just gonna say that I also like know people who really like the idea of like I'm also one of those people that like the idea of like going to like a kind of like a party, but like a dance kind of party where like there's a lot of music and stuff like that. But it doesn't always have to include substances or like smoky rooms or anything like that. I think in an area where like we could have like a sensory friendly room, but there also be an area where if you want to go dance or if you want to like have some fun in like an area like that. I think there are a lot of like autistic people who really love to dance in STEM. I don't know. And I feel like that's a space that I would really enjoy. But I feel like a lot of times those pride events are in spaces that are not accessible and they're also not usually sober. And that can be a really complicated space for, I think, a lot of autistic people as well.
Thank you so much for that, y'all. Okay, Eva, go for it.
So I would just kind of agree with what a lot of people are saying. Um, I would say an affirming space would prioritize accessibility. Some ways that I thought of this would be mobility aid accessible, noise and light and smell sensory sensitive. I think it would be a good idea in a lot of spaces to have a closed off area to smoke, especially as like cannabis is becoming more legalized and used. I do know a lot of autistic people find that to be something that is sensory soothing for them. But I also think it's just as valid for people to not and to have allergies to that. So I think a distinct area separate would be important. Same with having like mocktail type drinks. Mocktails are becoming a little bit more popular. Um, and I like that. I personally don't drink because we mentioned dysautonomia, but I have POTS. My body hates alcohol. So yeah, I'm sure the list could go on, but those are the ones that I initially thought of. With our increasing awareness of the intersection of being LGBTQIA plus and autistic, I really do think it's vital to prioritize both if you want to have a genuinely accepting environment.
Great. Thank you so much for it, Eva.
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So we've talked a little bit about what we wish the existing spaces would do better, even some affirming places that offer some accommodating features to both queer and autistic spaces. I'm wondering if anybody else could offer an example of a space, event, or experience, or another person that felt especially joyful and affirming of your intersecting identities, and what about that experience, event, etc., made you feel affirmed? Yeah,
Would you like me
of
to
course.
start? Okay. Um, so I think my main support circle makes me feel most affirmed. I don't have a lot of friends. I have about like five good friends, which for me is actually a lot to be honest. But I also see my sister who has quite a different experience with that. But like all five of them are somewhere identifying neurodivergent, a lot of them being autistic. So trusting them with me unmasking things like my dialogue, using sensory tools like my weighted dinosaur stuffed animal, and having space to talk about my special interests has created a really affirming space that I love and I feel very honored to have. I'm also quite lucky to be close with my mom. When I was first exploring, so someone had mentioned they were purposefully not tested. I was also purposefully not tested. It was recommended as early as preschool that I would be, but my mom at the time in the early 2000s was trying to protect me. That's very complicated, brings up a lot of complicated feelings, but I understand her point of view at the time. Um, I wish that the world was more accessible and honoring of autism, that it wasn't something that she felt like she needed to protect me from. But since being diagnosed, she has gone above and beyond to really understand autism. And I don't feel like she treats me differently. I just feel like she treats me right, if that makes sense. And like I said, I have other disabilities, and she has come a long way with understanding them. At first, she didn't like me to use the word disabled with myself. We had like dialogues about this because I was like, it's owning who I am. And she was like, I just don't want you to think you can't do anything. And I was like, disabled people can do whatever the fuck, sorry, I hope there's whatever we want to do, and find our own way to make it happen. And then lastly, my partner is my number one caregiver. They've done so much to understand my autism. When I was going through that self doubt phase for that year, that was really tough. They were always there to be like, you are diagnosed with autism. Even if you weren't diagnosed, you are autistic. I see you. And it was just a really safe space to explore those worries with. And they've continued to learn more about it and how best to support me. And like I said, friends have always been difficult things. So yes, I do consider my mom one of my friends, but having that support circle does really change my life, and it's made me feel a lot more affirmed.
That's wonderful, Eva. I'm feeling particularly touched by saying your mom did the work to kind of shift her mindset and what like disability means to a broader neurotypical community versus what it means to you. So that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that experience. I appreciate that. I also wanted to mention like sometimes we haven't found those affirming experiences yet, and sometimes we're still trying to find those affirming folks in our life. So if that's where any of the other panelists are right now, we don't have to just speak to the positive things. Just wanted to provide that encouragement. Would anyone else like to take a crack at the question? Repeat the question? Yeah, we can repeat the question. So what are some things? Let's see. Can you give an example of a space or event or experience that felt especially joyful and affirming of your intersecting identities? And if you've had such experience, what made you feel affirmed? But you can also share like what you're seeking or any other experience you feel comfortable sharing.
I don't want this to sound like an ad for Autism Tennessee, but I do feel like a lot of the events that I've come to with this organization have been that way, specifically with the Spectrum Connection group. It's connected me to people who just like get it and don't judge for like if I need to cancel last minute because I've had a really overwhelming day and I just like can't handle anything else. People who understand how special interests work. Um, and then like the queer community is part of that too. I know they're going to be accepting, they're going to have like social justice in mind. So, yeah, I would say like no space is ever perfect, but um, it's been pretty positive impact on my life.
Um, Actually, I think I want to kind of bring back Audi gender. Um, because I feel like in terms of trying to seek an experience that would be under the category of neurojoy, uh, that we in the context of like masking and performing girlhood or womanhood or whatever, I did not let myself enjoy so many things, and I did not enjoy them until I allowed myself to transition and explore them. Like I don't know what it was, but I had a huge mental block, like the salamanders. Like I did not let myself enjoy learning and pursuing salamanders in the woods before I transitioned. Why? I don't know. But that's explicitly, so I'm still trying to recover a lot of things that I would consider affirming or joyful in the terms of being autistic. And even trying like I'm in a few different chats that are autistic oriented. I'm relatively new to Autism Tennessee. So I haven't been to like any of those events and stuff. But even like trying to communicate and like be in the same group as other autistic people, I still have trouble communicating and like finding common ground with them. Like I don't feel like it's as instantaneous a lot of the time as we would hope. But I'm working on it, and it's been like enjoying my hobbies more in depth has been really helpful. So that's been great. It's helped me build a lot more self-confidence and diverse interests, so I don't just like be on my phone all the time. I could go do things. Um, so that's been really great. But I'm still looking for like more community, more communication. That's why I'm trying to go to these kind of things. But yeah, someone else.
So I kind of resonate with the like having a few friends thing. I mean, I would say I have 5 people I consider friends, excluding folks who are in some way like partners. Um, and I mean, they're all trans and autistic, so it's very that's helpful just a bit, you know. But as far as community goes, um, I've I think I have an idea of what I want from community that like doesn't really exist many places in the society that we live in, including like a lot of like queer spaces, activism spaces, in autism related spaces, like or any of my other mental health stuff where there are spaces related to it. And yeah, it's just and that's really frustrating. Um, because I've multiple times found places I was like, I think this is a good place. Um, and then like as you get to know more, because I'm very much a like I watch things on like I watch my chats. I don't always participate in stuff, but um I almost always seem to find things that make me uncomfortable about people and people who are their words and actions and intents are highly incongruent and um that doesn't make me feel safe. Do you want it? Okay.
Um, this is also not an ad for Autism Tennessee, but I do relate to the fact that Autism Tennessee has been really great for helping me talk to people that relate to like the autistic experience. And I think generally it's helped me practice unmasking around people that I've never met before, because that is horrifying most of the time. And I'm still working on it, but it's still something that I think is related to also my trans experience. When I was going through figuring out that I was not cis, I didn't have a lot of people. In fact, I don't really think I had anybody, except my therapist, who related to the trans experience. So I think I'm definitely lacking with like the support there, and I would love to meet more people who can relate to like the trans mask experience because I think that because I don't like have a lot of that around me, I think I have a hard time understanding what that means for me. And I think I'm still practicing being in touch with like my inner child and like understanding like what they want and like what they're seeking and what they're looking for. Because I think that's been a huge thing is like rediscovering who I am underneath all of the masking and underneath everything that I thought I needed to be in order to be accepted in society. And so I think maybe there hasn't been a whole lot of positive experiences, but that because I'm like on the journey there, that like hopefully there'll be more in the future.
Have something?
Right.
Did you have something else to say, or were you just passing it off?
Oh, I was asking.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thanks y'all for that. I love how Tara and Kamiko kind of spoke to the experience of maybe not quite finding exactly what you're looking for. I feel like there's a big misconception that uh, with a lot of different communities, but that all autistic people know each other and like each other for that reason, and it's not true. We have trouble finding our people even within our own communities, and everything is a process. Okay, let's see. So I think this next question will ask more about kind of in the same vein of um, what folks around you can do better. So what are some things you wish your neurotypical queer community members knew more about when it comes to your identities and accommodating different neurotypes, etc. And we will start with Eva again.
Okay. I don't think it's well known enough how often they statistically intersect. Another thing I would like for more neurotypical or just holistic people in general to know would be like what it means to be on the spectrum. Some examples I have of that are like autism versus ADHD and not confusing ADHD as being on the spectrum. And then common autistic support needs, especially at community events, I wish were more understood.
Great, thank you for that, Eva.
So I think something that would be really helpful for me is, at least in my personal experience, when I was diagnosed, I was forced to, well, like with the autism and the ADHD, but also like all of my physical disabilities kind of came all at the same time, and at least the diagnoses did. And it forced me through this period of really confronting a lot of like internalized ableism that I had, and like forced me to take care of myself in a way that I never did before and was never taught to because the people that were taking care of me didn't know how to take care of themselves in that way either. And so it's something that I've had to learn a lot about in therapy. It's something that I've had to learn a lot about in my everyday life. And I think the best thing that like holistic people can do is process that for themselves as well and like process their own like internalized ableism and understand like where they're also harming themselves by not like taking care of themselves and how that's not only harmful to them, but it's also harmful to people like us who are autistic and who are queer and who have different experiences than them. But we're also all still human, and we also all need to like take care of ourselves in different ways. And even if our needs are different, I think that it starts with compassion and it starts with community care. So,
Would it be okay to add something onto that or like just respond to that?
yeah, I'm done with my thought.
Okay. Oh my gosh, my brain's blanking. That's not great for me. There was something that you said that I was like, yes. Um, can you remind me of like the last sentence? You said, I'm so sorry.
I was saying something about I'm also have terrible memory. Something along the lines of like how it starts with compassion and like we need to like care
Take
about
care of ourselves.
ourselves first. Yeah.
Take care of ourselves. I think like hustle culture is such a big thing. Like my personal
Yes.
story, I was like taking 18 to 21 credit hours in college. That's not necessary. You can take 15 and be fine. I was a president and founder of one club and so many different clubs. And then as soon as I graduated college, I went to a full time job and I crashed the frick out. And I think definitely just thinking that like if you're busy, you're worth something is a really misnomer in society that I definitely fell into for a little while. So I just wanted to be like, that is true.
I agree.
Um, I I don't know. I kind of have a different uh kind of thing that I think probably a lot of people think of. As far as like allistic folks and such, I kind of would like them to just stay out of my space. And they seem to often feel like they need to insert themselves in spaces where um they're not really welcome. And so like I don't have a lot of people I'm close to who are I don't allistic or seem that way if they're, not thinking about themselves and other things. But even my job, I work remote, so like that's great for me. Um, but even with my job, uh, pretty sure two of my three close coworkers are not neurotypical. So, and I think probably have some, just we just all love spreadsheets. So I I kind of would really like allistic folks to just respect the fact that like I don't necessarily want to be your friend. Like I can work with you at a job, I can encounter you in life and talk to you, but like, please respect my boundaries that you don't feel safe to me a lot of the time. So,
Um, I I kind of want to, I guess, like talk about like a particular part of ableism. The thing that like gets on my mind a lot that I would really appreciate allistic people would emphasize more is like understanding like common like logic and communication processes that autistic people do. Because I feel like I always spend so much time trying to understand what they're trying to communicate to me, but it's never like back and forth. I don't understand. Like I feel like I missed so many social opportunities that wasn't necessarily had to be missed if it was just communicated appropriately. And if they want to be inclusive, they can't just be like, "Oh, I'm okay with autistic people." You have to understand at least to some degree how generally they're thinking about things. Like when I read articles about how autistic people think, like as an autistic person, I'll be like, wow, that's amazing that it's like already explained. You could just look it up. You can process that, figure it out, think about it that way. I think it would be like even really enlightening. I think they would benefit because like how are you communicating with yourself? How are you processing your things? I think it would be beneficial for autistic people to think about for themselves, even for their own benefit. Not that that's like the focus, but I think it would be very helpful. So I would like to emphasize that more and I feel like I had another one, but I don't remember. But did you want to go? Sure. Here you go.
Um, my mind is blank. Can you repeat the question, please? Something about like what people can do better?
Yeah. Or a way they can do that.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the expectations that neurotypical people have. Um, they kind of just assume a lot and have um different expectations for like how someone is going to behave. And I think they also um might say they're inclusive, but maybe some of the like tr things that are autistic traits are still kind of othered and like made fun of. Um, so just be aware of that. Um, I think there was something else I wanted to say, but I also forgot it. Did you remember what you were? Okay. Um, yeah. Speaking is hard. That's another thing, I guess.
Speaking is hard. Oh my gosh. Thank you all so much. We got a question kind of later in the day that I think got answered within this question. So I'll just reflect back to the chat and anyone who might be watching on Zoom. The question was how to best support queer and autistic staff from an organizational point or a supervisory point. Some things some of y'all talked about was learning autistic communication styles, the expectations thing, maybe truly getting to know how somebody communicates and making direct asks or maybe explaining intent behind an ask, those kinds of things. If anyone has anything to add on that, you totally can. Yes, Alan.
I just wanted to like mention I did explicitly get ADA for explicit instructions at my job, and they still don't do it. So they don't explain their job. They don't know their processes. They expect me to make it up. Like anything like that would be important. Like explicit communication, explicit expectations. Of course, the ability to work from home. I don't know why I have to like kind of argue for that ability still, because we have full capability to do so. And then things like maybe like I have like very specific stuff I need to wear to work that could also be a very problematic thing for autistic people. I really just want to mention the explicit instructions because for some reason that just doesn't really exist that much at work when it should. Like, what are we doing? Okay, but that's all. Okay.
As to the explicit instructions, I think just, yeah. That, just put bullet points in your email. Call it a day. I'll just blank my brain. Oh, right. So I have obviously been autistic in the workplace, currently am, and have a setup that is quite good for me. But I've also supervised folks who were neurodiverse and like also kind of I recognize things that could be identified as like autism symptoms. I think there's just kind of a noticing people like you as a thing. It's kind of how, trans folks are always like, oh, you're waiting for you to come out, recently come out egg. So that kind of thing. But it's really frustrating because to the ADA accommodations thing, supervisors are generally like explicitly told, you don't mention ADA unless they bring it up, which like I flaunted. I didn't care. Like, and I found that whenever I talk to folks about it, they were like, what is that? And so like that the issue with that is like it not only applies to us, but also so many holistic folks don't have any idea what the ADA like is about. And so if you try to say, like I need these accommodations, like there's a good chance they're not going to, I don't know, really even comprehend or try to like figure out what you're actually asking for. Which is like really frustrating. A friend of mine at a job was asked for an accommodation that was denied, and they denied it because they said it was like a security issue. And I was talking about it, and I was like, we already have the software to do this on our computer. Like, you don't, this is already doable. They just didn't tell you. Um, which is like, I don't know. I think people just, I think, need to be more intentional about listening to folks and what they say they need, because usually we know better than the other person what we need. And yeah, so and also as a supervisor type or having done supervise people, if you like work with people to communicate how they need or be flexible in the ways they want, so much stress off you, like so much stress. Just because one, your relationship with them is better because they feel respected, but also you're not fighting the current. And I I just wish people would understand that when they're thinking about accommodations, is that this is to help someone work better, and like everyone involved will be happier, I guess. I don't know. I got a lot of feelings on this. Did you want it or? Yeah. Okay.
Um, yeah, I was gonna agree with the direct communication point. I feel like the last time I was able to physically work like in a workplace, I was in the process of getting diagnosed with autism and like figuring out that that I was autistic. And it was a really weird process in the sense that like my managers and the people who I was working with did not believe me because I masked so well. And it was like a customer service job, so I would have to oftentimes like the critique that I would get was that I don't talk to people enough. And it's because obviously I struggle with that. And I feel like there were a lot of situations where direct communication would have solved so many issues, or just, if you're upset at me, just tell me that I can't figure that out. It's really hard sometimes to figure that out. So I think, it's not going to hurt my feelings if you just tell me that I hurt your feelings. So I think a lot of things can just be solved with more direct communication. Um, yeah.
Related to direct communication, something I don't think is helpful in the workplace is if someone has done something wrong and you bring it up in a meeting as like a PSA to everyone, because oftentimes that person won't fully understand that that's feedback for them directly because you're not telling it to them directly. Um, I've seen that happen so much. I think just pulling them aside and telling them directly would solve so many problems.
Thank you all so much for that. Eva, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Um, no, I think the direct communication is really important. Um, I guess something like kind of on my mind is just like going back to the hustle culture, like more awareness and acceptance around disabled people who can't work. That would be cool. That's not really coming from anyone in particular, though. That's more of like a societal thing.
Absolutely. Thank you. Sorry, we keep having to turn the volume up and then back down again. But I appreciate you so much, Eva. Thank you for that addition. Okay, y'all. I think with that, we can move on to some questions. We'll ask one first, if anyone in the audience has questions, and then we will get through our lovely folks on Zoom.
Hello, I'm going to speak loudly. So this is a little bit of a sensitive topic, so just let me know if you don't want to answer it or just throw the question out entirely if you want to. Um, I was on a panel for Autism Tennessee about 6 months ago, and I really wanted to talk about gender because that's important to me. But I was afraid to because there are certain people, specifically J.K. Rowling, who have taken ableism and fueled their transphobia. So she specifically says that autistic people don't know themselves well enough to know that they're actually transgender. So I want to know if anybody wants to answer what your response to that is.
I have a statement. Oh, did I cut someone off?
Go ahead.
Talk J.K. Rowling. That is my only statement. Thank you.
I agree with the sentiment. I just think it's just pure ableism. Um, it's kind of dehumanizing autistic people. Um, like not only is it transphobic, but it's just, yeah, I don't know. That's, I guess, all I have to say. It's super ableist, and I don't see how anyone can support that.
I wanted to, I guess, emphasize that it's not only just uh, ableistic, because that's like it's ableist, but it also really undershoots and underappreciates the interesting intersection between queer and autism. Because what does that say about how we process these things or how we develop our sense of self? Like, there's so many avenues we could explore that to where it's more interesting. I don't think that's a reason to dismiss the intersection or the term autogender, though that is probably why it's not as used as it could be. Is like you don't want to explain to the first person you meet that you're trans and it's explicitly linked to being autistic. Like that could be stressful when we're in an autistic or an ableistic society. But I feel like that's super underappreciating how interesting and informative exploring neurodiversity could be. Like, I also have aphantasia. I would love more information about the inability to visualize things. And I think it's super cool. And I don't feel like that's appreciated enough. Oh, and I just want to say that. Okay.
I was just gonna say that like back to like kind of labels and the fact that I don't really like like a lot of terminology and like prescriptive definitions. I think that like if someone I don't know, I feel like you shouldn't really people can decide what their labels are, and that's fine. People can decide how they identify, you know, how they see themselves. And I think that there is like a fixation by people, just like humans in general, because like we love categories, to try to say, oh, if you have this label that you embrace, so autogender, these other things must be involved in that. Like they have to be involved in that. But like they don't, they can my yeah, I mean just people don't trust people to know themselves, and that makes me really mad. So
Kind of bouncing off of what Arden said, I think that it's also just like speaks to like how the representation of like autistic people in media is very limited and that there aren't a variety of experiences really seen. And I think that at least for me as well, that's why it was really hard to recognize that I was autistic as well, is because the representation of autism was very different. And then with I feel like it speaks to like how people infantilize autism a lot, and that they can't, and that we can't understand ourselves, which I think is absolutely wild because I feel like with autistic people, we've had to understand so much about ourselves. We've had to do so much self-discovery in order to figure these things out about ourselves that I find it really dichotomous and really interesting that people think that way about autistic people because I feel like there's so much deep diving that we have to do with ourselves that I feel like autistic people don't do nearly as much. So
can I say one more thing?
yeah.
Um, Specifically like narratives have been mentioned, and I think that there's also a very strange, I don't know, so many characters like in media are in some way autistic coded, like just an immense number. Um, and I feel like there's a, especially for like holistic creators, there's this kind of, and people in general, there's a kind of, I mean, they don't want things that people generally want to be able to know things if they want to know them. And a lot of times, because it's like a very different experiencing life, um, I think there's kind of a anger that like you can't necessarily if you can't conceptualize something, it's being kept from you. And like, especially for entitled groups of people, that can make them very angry and just not pleasant or nice.
Thanks, y'all, for that question. I'm gonna ask my lovely assistants here if you could point me to a question on Zoom that we could answer. Okay. Okay, great. It looks like we got a question or somebody asking if they could ask a question pretty early on in the Zoom. So, Christopher, if you'd like to either type out your question or come off of mute, we'd love to take your question.
All right, you're unmuted.
Is Christopher with us?
Yes, I'm here. So,
Wonderful. What is your question?
basically, I've been wondering, um, if, 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 well, I basically have been dealing with this whole entire, um, I basically gotten stuff, m- my stuff hacked. And I didn't really mean for any of this to happen. Now I'm basically, because my whole entire future basically relies on my social media account, and I don't really want to start over all again. I mean, like, I made so much progress on there. I want to do so much on it. And let's just say things have been falling out. I also haven't really seen my boyfriend or any of the friends I made on my social media accounts for a long time, and I'm pretty sure that they are all deeply worried for me, along with all the fans who adore me too. So, yeah, I have been trying to get all of that fixed. In the meantime, I'm basically just trying to keep myself entertained with my Nintendo Switch or my TV. And also too, I have fallen in love with a with a boy online that we basically first spoke on Twitter. His name is Turner Heath, but he mostly just calls himself Faye, which is a character from Paw Patrol. We deeply love each other, but my family doesn't really trust him. And his family doesn't really like the fact that both me and him are gay. And
I think
that's
the question
basically my
in there was,
question.
hi, can you still hear us?
Um, did everybody heard that.
I think we heard you, Christopher. So I think, correct us if we're wrong, but I think the question in there was, how do you make connections when there may be people who don't support you in your life, or how to find connections when your normal means of interacting with someone, like getting your social media hacked, which a lot of people use to connect, how can you find community outside of social media? Does that align with what you've been sharing with us, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Then Eva, if you'd like to chime in on that question, we'll start with you.
Um, so I think one of the ways that I've really been able to meet and connect with fellow autistic people was joining my local burlesque scene. So if you're into any kind of art or computer or anything like that that has like a local meetup, um that might be more neurodivergent leaning. Like a lot of people who are in burlesque like to do burlesque because they are neurodivergent. Not everyone, but several people I met. And so that's been a good way to connect with fellow autistic people, and finding people who you have similar special interests as kind of goes along with that. I love talking about drag and burlesque, and so it's really nice to find people to connect with. So finding a local scene has really changed my life with knowing other autistics.
Thank you, Eva, and we'll pass this on to the in-person panelists now.
So I actually don't use social media at all, except for some like Fediverse stuff. But I also am, you know, classic chronically online trans girl from very young age. Um, and it sounds like there aren't a lot of easy ways for you to get out of like the space you're in, like out of the house to places. And so my primary means of like social interaction, because I don't use social media, is usually like other types of communities online. Um, it and that can vary in all sorts of forms. That can often be like, I don't know, could be a Discord server, which I don't consider social media as much. Some people do. I don't understand that. But like I frequently join, take a look, lurk for a bit, and just leave because most of them don't, end up being quite what I want. But also like I'm still kind of old school forums, like bulletin board stuff, IRC, like all that kind of like you tend to have more the same people in a space who are ideally there because they have a common interest or reason for being there. So, like a lot of I mentioned that music is kind of my big special interest. I spend a lot of time looking for things that are unlike anything I've heard, and a lot of the times those come from me saying, "Hey, like on a forum, I recently listened to this, this, and this. Is there anything like this?" And, people talk about it. And then those are also people who I frequently see there. And, sometimes they're people who I communicate with outside of that setting as well. Like if we kind of talk and hit it off or whatever. So I'm not a social media user, but I think there's a lot of other ways to connect online that kind of self-select people who want to be there instead of just people who want to yell into the void and see who picks up. So, want to go?
Yeah. I also wanted to mention I'm not using social media anymore just because it's like stressful these days, but um I also think seeking out online and in real life communities that are very interest focused are really important. But I also want to mention that I think this is maybe not that I know what cishet autistic people do, but I think that is a specific benefit for being queer and autistic is we have all these queer things being organized all the time. Like we got events happening and things online happening. There's always stuff happening specifically in that thing. And that's been my primary experience as a queer and autistic person is going to queer events. Trying to seek out specifically autistic specific communities that are not centered around queerness is relatively new to me. Um, but also there's tons of very specific and niche online stuff that are not social media. There's a big movement of trying to bring back more old school online things that's trying to pick up that because social media can be a bit of a brain rot and there's other options. So seeking out those kind of things, special interest groups are really good. And then, of course, queer events, like we mentioned, is highly likely to have a ton of autistic people in it. So that's always a huge benefit. Yeah. Very. Who wants the mic?
You want it or okay.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, y'all. Did we have any pressing questions from the chat come in? Yeah, absolutely. To stay in touch about other events happening in Tennessee or at Autism Tennessee, including these Spectrum chats and its sister event, the Parent Perspectives Panels. You can visit our calendar at autismtennessee.org. The calendar's up for you. We do have a Parent Perspectives panel coming up in July. So stay tuned on the calendar and make sure you sign up for our newsletter to stay included on all things Autism Tennessee. I think we will wind down our night, but thank you again to our panelists. Thank you again to Autism Tennessee and our folks on Zoom and in person. Thank you all for spending your Wednesday evening with us. If you find yourself needing support or want to learn more about the Spectrum Connection Group for LGBTQ plus autistic adults, you can reach out to support@autismtennessee.org or contact us via phone at 615-270-2077. Thanks, y'all.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.